Wow, what an amazing day. What an amazing time. It is still morning. So, good morning, everybody. It is a great pleasure to be able to share and have some time to spend with you this morning. What an amazing service we've had to this point. An incredible welcome put together by the Nelsons up there in Delaware. So, thank you so much for your creativity. What an amazing, amazing communion. Such a vulnerable sharing that we heard from Ken and from Cheryl, just to really put our hearts right there at the foot of the cross. Thank you, Naomi, for sharing your convictions about contribution. But at this point, they've asked me to go ahead and share a message that's on my heart. And when it comes down to it, it's sometimes kind of hard to figure out what I'm going to preach. So people might ask me a week ago, what are you going to preach? I tell them I don't know. They might ask me 3 days ago, what are you going to preach? I'm not sure. They might ask me this morning, what are you going to preach? I'm still putting it together. You might ask me 10 seconds ago, what are you going to preach? I was still putting notes together. Why? Because God's blessings are new every morning. They are new to me every morning. They are new every time that I open the scriptures. They are new every time that I think about them. They are new every time that I can even just fathom. They are always new. And with that, I'm always moved by what I'm going to share. So my notes are continuously changing. It's awesome to be able to have that type of relationship with God, knowing that He is a moving God, knowing that as we are part of the International Christian Church, we are part of a moving movement, right? Where a movement needs to move in order to be a movement. So it's awesome to be able to just say, you know what? I love my church, I love my God, and I love you guys for being here with me. But today's message is going to prepare us for something a little that's coming up soon. And, you know, it comes around every year and we have this glorified day and it kind of just like takes people off guard. I'm gonna give you a hint about what I mean. Here we go. You know, in the Swiss, right? According to BBC, the Swiss have been harvesting, right? And they've been harvesting spaghetti trees. They've been able to find the technology to be able to create spaghetti trees and grow them and harvest them. They actually broadcast footage of them doing this, harvesting spaghetti trees. There's been such an enormity, there was such an enormity of reaction to them showing this footage that so many people called in that they were like, hey, listen, I got to get a hold of one of these spaghetti trees. How do I acquire one of these spaghetti trees? The Swiss responded, as they do. You know, I don't know what it is over in Europe, but my goodness. The Swiss responded by sending out a broadcast years ago, back during black and white television, to say, listen, if you go out and you get nylon stockings and you put them over your TV, you will actually have color TV on your black and white TV. You'll be able to see everything in color. There was such an enormity of a response that, you know what? They sold out of stockings. People just went out and went buying stockings and just to see color TV when it was black and white. There was such a push for it. BBC had a great response to that. They say, you know what? You know, we got this thing now where you can't just watch TV. You don't want to just watch it in color. How about smell-o-vision? This is going to be awesome because so many people went up there sniffing at their TVs, trying to catch a sniff, trying to catch a whiff of what was on the TV. And then they had an enormity of people that called in and said, hey, look, it works. Smell-o-vision works. It's amazing. You guys have done a great job putting this together. I'm so glad that you did it. Or maybe in the Netherlands, what did they do? They said, hey, we're going to have a TV and radio tax. Now, this is a real thing. They have a TV and a radio tax. But they say, listen, if you haven't paid your TV and your radio tax, what we're going to do is we're going to have the policemen go around and they're going to have this special scanner that's going to go from TV to TV, go from house to house and scan your house to see whether or not and compare it with the list to see whether or not you've paid your TV and radio tax. Now, the only way to get out of this is if you go and you buy aluminum foil and you wrap aluminum foil all the way around your TV and all the way around your radio so they can't detect the signals coming from them. These are true stories. As outlandish as they may seem, what did the people do in response to this call? Well, they sold out of foil paper. People rushed to the stores and bought foil paper and wrapped them around their TVs. Others said, you know what? I need to rush to go pay my TV tax and my radio tax. And there was an influx of TV and radio tax payments that came into the Netherlands. What an amazing response. But all of these started off as what? April Fool's pranks. There are no spaghetti trees. There will never be spaghetti trees. There's no way that you could take a stocking and put it over a black and white TV and all of a sudden see color. We've not invented smell-o-vision. It's not a thing yet. I'll just let you know. Don't go smelling your Zoom screen right now, trying to figure out what kind of fragrance I'm wearing at this point. It's not going to work. Don't call me and tell me that it did work, because it doesn't. Don't worry about your radio and TV tax. Here, don't worry about that. It's already covered through your subscription to whatever subscription you have for your cable. It's already covered in that. But here's the thing: there's so many ways that we've glorified being a fool. And on April Fool's Day coming up, I figured maybe we should have a good message about, how to be nobody's fool. There's a great quote that my wife shared with me, and it's really by nobody. There's an anonymous author. We don't know who this person is, but the quote was amazing. As soon as I find it, I'll show it to you. But it's the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. The truth of the matter is, we have a lot in common with a fool. I didn't even realize how much I had in common with a fool until I did this lesson. Let's go through a quick survey of the book of Proverbs. I'm not going to ask you to turn to all these because I'm going to read them quickly, but some of them will be in the NIV translation and some of them will be in the NLT, the New Living Translation. But let's start off in Proverbs 18, verses 6 through 7. And I'm going to kind of lay out some of the ways that we have so much commonality with a fool. Maybe you'll be able to pick them out too, because sometimes you just got to put things into a way that you can see them. For me, I chose anatomy. So we're going to look at the anatomy of a fool very quickly. In Proverbs 18, verses 6 and 7, it says, the lips of fools bring them strife, and their mouths invite a beating. The mouths of fools are their undoing, and their lips are a snare for their very lives. So we got mouths, we got lips. Hey, we got something in common. In Proverbs 14, verse 3, the Bible reads, a fool's mouth lashes out with pride, but the lips of the wise protect them. Once again, lips and mouths. Here we go. And Proverbs 19, verse 29, once again, the NIV translation, it says, penalties are prepared for mockers and beatings for the backs of fools. Just so happens I have a back. I'm finding a lot in common here. Ecclesiastes 7, verse 9, it says, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the laps of fools. All right, here we go with these laps again, man. Okay, well, I've got a lot in common with fools. We talk about mouths, we talk about lips, backs, laps. Hey, I got all those things. Maybe you have all those things too, and didn't realize how much you had in common with a fool. But each one of these things is only part of a way to identify a fool. I really appreciated my time in the military. It gave me an opportunity to understand. We had many different stations and tasks to complete before completing basic training. And when we got there, one of the first things they handed us was a small little book, but it was very thick. And it was called a smart book. And if anytime you were sitting around and you had nothing to do because you had finished all of your tasks, it was actually your responsibility to be studying out your smart book. And within the smart book, it would have many different tasks, and there were two simple requirements. There were only two positions you could be in. You could be a go or a no-go. It was very simple. Either you would pass or you would fail in these different practicals. So one of the practicals was how to evaluate a casualty. And as you came across a scene and you saw someone who was unresponsive, didn't look like they were in a very good position, you had to start looking out to them to say, hey, listen, is that guy okay? How is he doing? And for us, I believe we can learn a valuable lesson from that, to look around our congregation and look at some of the anatomy of those who are around us, look at some of the physiology, which is what we're going to look at next, of some of those who are around us, and then start asking the right questions to be able to discern whether or not, hey, listen, are we being wise or are we being foolish? Are the people around us are they wise? Are they people of wisdom? Or are they just playing the fool? So each one of us has a great opportunity to be able to say, you know what, let's go ahead and take a look at how to evaluate a casualty of this situation. What is the function of a fool? Well, let's look at the real thing first. In Romans chapter 12, we're going to look at what the function of the body is. What is your function supposed to be? In Romans 12, verses 4 and 5, it says, for just as each one of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function. So in Christ, though many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. Our function, we are called to be together. We are called to be working together, just as my hands are attached to my wrists, which are attached to my arms, and that's attached to my chest, and we're all one body. It's all one body here, My head is attached to my body as well. We're all one body. We're all called to function together, one another. If my hand started doing its own thing, it would look weird. If I had a nervous tick, it would be noticeable. If I had a strange blinking pattern for some reason, or if I had long blinks, it would be very noticeable. And you would be able to pick up, there's something that's different. There's something that's not quite the same about that guy. But the same way with our comparison between ourselves, this body that's mentioned, and we're going to read a couple more passages that are going to help us to understand the physiology of a fool as well. So when it comes down to it, we've already talked about the mouths, the lips, the laps, and the backs. But now let's see what some of the acts of a fool are. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 9, says, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for the anger resides in the laps of fools, right? That's where we kind of left off, was with the laps. How many of us have taken so many opportunities to act a fool? How many of us have taken all of those opportunities to say, you know what? Here's one of those opportunities where I get to go ahead and keep it real. Here's one of those opportunities where I get to go ahead and give full vent to my anger in my heart, just to let everybody know it ain't happening here. We've acted a straight fool. I know I've done it. There are times where I remember one time I was riding with my wife on motorcycles, and we went to turn into this parking lot. And as soon as we went to lean into the parking lot, this car that was sitting right next to us at the stoplight, I don't know how this lady didn't see us, but as we both went to turn, because there were two turning lanes, she drifted and nearly hit my wife. She was on her own bike. She nearly hit my wife. I slowed down, and all I could see was like my wife nearly getting hit. So my anger went through the roof. I was irate. I chased this lady down in the parking lot. I went and parked my motorcycle. I took my helmet off. I put everything down, and I started the march. And when I say the march, you know which march I'm talking about. That one that nothing is going to stop you except the hand of God, or the hand of my wife at this point. So my wife literally had to stop me. He's like, came and grabbed me. No, DJ, don't do it. Don't do it. Because right then I was about to act a fool. This lady was about to catch all of my feelings and my anger and my frustration and some of the hostility that was about to come out, because she had almost taken my wife out. And I was going to let her know about it. So what did my wife do? She grabbed me. She said, no. She went over and she gently talked to this lady, and she says, I don't know if you realized, but you almost hit me in that turn. That is those two turning lanes, and you came right over. You nearly took me out. I was far away from the conversation, so I can't give you any more details than that because I wouldn't have been able to keep my calm at that point. But I saw her reaction. She had 2 kids in the car, and they would have fell victim to my hostility because that would not have stopped me. But my wife did. She was a wise woman in that instance. And I had to thank her and say, you know what, I'm glad you took care of it because my way of taking care of it was going to be act a fool. But I appreciate having somebody in my life for that reason. In Proverbs chapter 18, verse 3, it says, in the NLT, it says, spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. You know, we like to sometimes just go off and just start popping off at the mouth, as they say. In Proverbs 29, verse 20, it says, there is more hope for a fool than for someone who speaks without thinking. Just giving off whatever is at the top of your mind without even giving any thought to it. It says there's more hope for a fool. So are you in an instance where you're actually in a worse position than a fool because you won't listen to the problems and the people that are around you? Are you not listening to the entirety of what's being said? Or are you just quick to respond? In Proverbs 26, verse 6 through 7, it tells us that, once again in the New Living Translation, trusting a fool to convey a message is like cutting off one's feet or drinking poison. A proverb in the mouth of a fool is as useless as a paralyzed leg. Trying to teach a fool in these instances, you can try to teach them scriptures. You can try, they can grab onto it. They can actually go preach. They can actually go share. But it will be no more effective than a paralyzed leg. It will be no more effective. It will be just as pleasant, as I said, cutting off one's own feet and drinking poison. A surefire way to harm yourself or bring death to your life. An end to your life, I should say. Speaking foolishly. Sorry about that. But each one of us have to take an opportunity to really recognize what our commonalities are. Because as we already read in Proverbs chapter 12, in Romans chapter 12, the functions of what the body was called to be was together. What we were called to be were ones that worked together to eliminate this whole idea of being foolish. But each one of us has now an opportunity to say, what was the function of the fool? The function of the fool was to distract you. The function of the fool was to actually paralyze you, to take you out, to cause you discomfort, to bring you to an early death. That's all that the fool was here for. And when we decide to act a fool, we play right into that. So let's go to take a look at a fool in his own habitat. Let's take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 25. It's very difficult, I believe, to have a conversation about fools and not bring up this passage. And starting in verse 2, it says, a certain man in Mon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. While David was in the desert, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your servants and they will tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my young men, since we have come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. At this point, David's been on the run. Saul has died, and Samuel has died. Samuel has died at this point, and Saul is still chasing David down. But David had an opportunity at this point actually to take Saul out, but he stayed his hand. He says, nah, I'm not going to lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. It's not even right. He says, I'm not even going to, he cut off a piece of his robe when he had the opportunity to take him out, but he didn't. He actually felt terrible about it afterwards, just to say, you know what, it wasn't right for me to do that. But here now he's still on the run, and he's got hundreds of soldiers with him, and he's like, you know what, here, we need to find some food. And we've been protecting this guy, and he doesn't even really know that he's being protected, but let's go up to him and let's just ask him for some help, which we're well entitled to do as the king, or as the protector of the land. So let's see what he says. In verse 9, it says, when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Now, when they gave this message in David's name, what that means is they would have come in the full authority as David had sent them and announced themselves in the fashion of royalty, in the fashion of letting you know, hey, look, this is the authority that I'm sent with. Just as if the president was to send you a message, it would come with a certain seal, or if it was to be, in this case, delivered to you, there would probably be a convoy of government officials that would come with it to let you know that business was meant. If I looked outside and I saw a convoy of black SUVs, pulling up to my door and flashing lights, and all these guys getting out in these, government looking suits and government looking haircuts and things of that nature, I'd be like, hey, what's going on here? It's something I'm called to take seriously. There's a certain way that authority looks in this situation. And very much so, it would have looked this way before Nabal. But Nabal would have answered in verse 10, says, Nabal answered David's servants, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to the men coming from who knows where? So let me get this straight. You say this guy that's been protecting my lands and has an army somewhere surrounding me, and he's coming and he's asking me for some bread and some meat and some water for enjoying the protection I've already received. Who is this dude? Man, don't you know people are just going away and separating themselves from their masters at this point? This doesn't make any sense to this guy. But if you look at it now, does it really make any sense to have an argument with an army? It doesn't. But this is the position of a fool. Given all the information, given all of the circumstance laid out straight to them, plain as sight, you got now guys that show up to your door, they deliver you the message. It's like if these official government caravans showed up to my door and delivered me the message that, hey, listen, the president's decided he wants to see you. He needs some taxes from you. There's the U.S. Army is surrounding your neighborhood right now. That's the only thing keeping out the rest of the bad things. I don't know if it's zombies or whatever outside of this perimeter, but that's the only thing keeping you safe right now. And we need your support. Will you give us support? I don't know who you talk about. I ain't got nothing to do with y'all. Who is this person you talk about? What's the president? Man, I'm my own nation. I'm my own sovereign nation. I ain't got nothing to do with y'all. Well, if they were to let that force in, guess what? My minute force would be overcome. That's the truth of the matter. But here, David, with the same way that I would be presented with all the information and all the facts, I would have to be called to make a decision. Here, he was called to make a decision. Nabal chose to just disregard who David was. They had given him enough information to know not only who he was, but who his father was. And his response is to disregard them both. His lineage, all the things that were brought before him, he just disregards. But if we pick up coming, just to speed things along, in verse 14, it says, one of the servants told Nabal's wife, Abigail. Okay, so his servant is actually looking out for him. He's going to say, listen, maybe we should let the wife know. Because in the beginning, it said she was intelligent. We saw what this guy's response was. Maybe she'll have a better response for us. It says David sent messengers to from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them doing nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us. All the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. There are times when we shut our ears off to any advice. We want nothing to do and nothing to hear from anyone except ourselves. And that's the way these servants felt. They were like, look, there's nothing. This guy is just such a wicked person. How our whole household, we're part of the household. We're all in danger. And he's hurling insults. We've seen the army protecting us. We've benefited from their protection. We've seen what it was like when they weren't there. We've noticed, we've kept count of what was around us. They haven't been taking things from us by force. They're coming and asking for providing for a service that they've already provided. The protection that was already there. You know, for us in parallel, hey, there's a service that's already been provided for us. It's called the creation of the world. Every time we look around, we can look and we can see mountains. We can look and we can see grass. We can look and we can see trees. We didn't create them. So they had to get there somehow. The materials of this world, we didn't create them. They had to get here somehow. Yet, do we look at those things and say, you know what? Do I give my gratitude to God at this point? Do I give my worship up to the one who created it? Or do I continue to respond like the ball and say, you know what? Who is this God you're talking about? Who cares about this Jesus guy? Nobody cares. What a foolish thing to say. And looking at it, we're like, hey, look, there's disaster that's awaiting you. There's an end to your path. Which end do you want to come to? Do you want to come to the end of the fool or the end of the wise? Abigail is able to save Nabal from destruction at that point. She's able to go and have a conversation with David and actually deliver 200 loaves of bread to him. And after she hears all this stuff, she's like, listen, because David was about to act a fool. Let me show you. And in verse 12, it says in verse 12, back up, it says, David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, put on your swords. So they put on their swords. And David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. David wasn't playing. He heard all those insults and stuff that were hurled back at him after the protection he had provided. He says, nah, put your swords on. We're going after this guy. We're going for a ride, as they say. It's about to be on. David wasn't playing. He strapped on his sword. He had his guys strap on their swords and said, we're going for a ride. We're going to take 400 of the homies with us. And this guy's coming to a bad end right now. But that was what was awaiting him. But Abigail, being intelligent, she helped him out. She gave him an opportunity to go back and to actually not only provide what was asked for, but to actually provide Nabal with an opportunity for repentance, to provide Nabal with an opportunity to have a great end. Unfortunately, he didn't make that choice. In verse 36, as we skip down, because David accepted Abigail's gifts. And in verse 36, it says, when Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was living it up, He was in the high spirits and very drunk. He's YOLO. You only got one life to live, right? He's like, this is it. I done already insulted the king. Whatever happens, happens. Maybe he'll come after me. Maybe he ain't coming after me. I'm going to go ahead and live up my life, right? He says he's living like a king at this point, enjoying all those spoils that he wouldn't give up. It says, then in the morning, In verse 37, then in the morning when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. He had 10 days and a night of drunkenness to make a different decision. Even after his wife just like relayed to him all that was about to happen to him, his heart just failed him, and he didn't choose to repent. Ultimately, the name Nabal means fool. And he lived just as a fool would. You can go back and read back in your own time, but these are the things that we come up against on a regular basis. And we have a commonality because we're provided in this day and age with so much information. We are in the information age. We have an opportunity to say, listen, I can go at my fingertips and just type in search words for scriptures. I can go at my fingertips and just type in historical facts.
Join the meeting.
I can go at my fingertips and have knowledge delivered to me instantly. Yeah, but how often do I look for wisdom? How often do I choose not to be a fool about what's going on around me? How long have I been a fool? Let's look at Proverbs chapter 22, verse 15 and see. It says, folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it away. Once again, we look at this and say, wait a minute, folly has been with me since childhood? Wow, that's a long time. It's bound up in the heart of a child until the point where you're actually disciplined. It actually takes someone else having a rod, a boundary, a border, some kind of restrictions on your life to actually help you out of giving into folly and becoming a fool. This is a serious thing. It takes help to stop being a fool. It is very much possible to go from being a fool to being wise. It's a question that God asks us, when will you become wise, you fools? But each one of us have to make a decision. We have to look at our lives, recognize the forces that are out there, recognize the things that that have not come into our life. Here's the thing. If you're alive today, you're still in that position that Nabal was in, an opportunity to make a decision. He had the same opportunity, and we have commonality with fools in that respect. We have an opportunity to make a decision today that can change our eternity. Will you make that decision today? You can be taught by a number of people, but do you know if you're being taught by a wise man or a fool? Do you know if the man that is delivering the message to you, even me today, yes, do you know if I'm a wise man or a fool? How would you know? What would you look for? How would you evaluate the casualty? Would you call out to him and say, hey, listen, does he seem dizzy and disoriented? Or does he seem like, no, he has an answer for that? Does he know when to shut up? Or does he not know when to stop talking? Even a fool seems wise if he just keeps his mouth shut, but if he opens his mouth, he can remove all doubt. Right? In the responses that they have, in the responses that I have, do they come across as wise? In my life, in the life that I live, do you see the activities that I have on a regular basis to know that I'm alive and well? Are you able to talk to me, correct me, or challenge me? Am I correctable? The truth of the matter is, I have people correct me all the time. And I know some of you are thinking that your leaders are perfect, but they're not. I'll let you in on a secret. They're not. And I know some of you are thinking about some of the leaders that we have in this church and maybe even believing that this lesson is about them. And I'll go ahead and let you in on a secret. It is. Ken Chin, it's not that his jokes are folly. It's just that when you listen to him and that's when the folly happens. I can't believe that you guys think he's funny. I don't get it. You enter right into folly at that point. But you keep doing it. I love you, Kim. It's a great time because I thank Ken and Cheryl for the leadership that they provide me. The discipline and the rod of correction that they offer on a regular basis is just to say, you know what? We're going to drive out the folly that's in DJ's heart. We're going to drive out all of that correction, all of those things that that need to be corrected on a regular basis. Without them in my life, where would I be? I don't want to know. Honestly, no. But let's take a look at Mark, because maybe some of you guys are just not connecting with how serious this issue is. In Mark chapter 7, starting verse 20, Jesus has words here that maybe we should listen to. It says, he went on, what comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within, out of a man's hearts, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance. And had he stopped right there, we'd be safe. But at the last point, he adds, and folly. Right there bound with all of these other sins that we would consider serious. Murder, adultery, folly. In verse 23, it says, all these evils come from inside a man and make him unclean. That is the challenge. That is the severity of what we're dealing with when we're talking about acting a fool or allowing folly to rule our life. So what do? What is our answer to this? Our answer is simple. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 10, verse 8 and 9. And the Bible reads, the wise in heart accept commands, but a chattering fool comes to ruin. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. The truth of the matter is, God is nobody's fool. He knows exactly what's in our hearts. And I want to give you a quick challenge and a little bit of an insight maybe into lessons to come. When it comes to the heart of the fool, the mouth and the heart were the two things that were actually mentioned most when we went through Proverbs. There were 72 verses that I found in Proverbs alone that just talked about fools and foolishness, and folly. But each one of these verses led me to the point where most of them talked about the mouth and the heart. For our mouth, let us speak wisdom. Let us look to the scriptures to follow the commands so that we can become wise. For our hearts, there are 4 challenges to our hearts. First is sensualism. The world is full of sex sells. It is full of that which goes to tantalize our senses and to lead us into sensualism, to worshiping being sexual. The second that bonds up in the heart of a fool, sensationalism. Making things greater than they actually are, or making things appear greater than they actually are. Literally to take a molehill and turn it into a mountain. You look at something very minute. The scriptures also say, listen, you can strain a gnat and swallow a camel. These are the types of things that happen when you become too focused in one area without looking at the entirety of what the scriptures say. You make something out to be much bigger than it actually is. The third thing, sentimentalism. Looking at a person in your life or your own life and looking and saying, you know what? It's not really that bad because I know that person. Their righteousness is way more than their wickedness right now. The scriptures disagree. And if you'd like to know more, tune in for the next study. The fourth thing, because there are 4 chambers of the heart. I think fools fill up 4 ways. Cynicism. looking at the ways of men and just not having a great outlook or hope for them. But don't be challenged and filled up on those things, because those evil thoughts and desires, that's what's killing us. That's what's taking away from our fellowship and taking away from our ability to be able to be connected, as Romans 12 already called us to be, one body. Each one of us has an opportunity to now make a decision about, will we accept the commands that God has put in our lives? If you haven't made a decision about whether or not you'll accept the commands and you want to remain a fool, hey, I will give you some insight. The ways of the fool in these instances that we've talked about all lead to destruction. There's only one fool that actually makes it. There's only one time, okay, where this actually works out. And that's when you're a fool for Christ. Let's turn to 1 Corinthians. Chapter 4. We're coming in for a landing here. But the scripture reads, starting in verse 8, it says, already you have all you want. Already you have become rich. You have begun to reign, and that without us. How I wish that you really had begun to reign, so that we might also reign with you. For it seems that, to me, that God has put us apostles on display at the end of the procession, like those condemned to die in the arena. We have been made a spectacle to the whole universe, to the angels as well as the human beings. We are fools for Christ, but you are so wise in Christ. We are weak, but you are strong. You are honored. We are dishonored. To this very hour, we go hungry and thirsty. We are in rags. We are brutally treated. We are homeless. We work hard with our hands, with our own hands. When we are cursed, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure it. When we are slandered, we answer kindly. When we have become scum of the earth, the garbage of the world, right up to this moment. The apostles laid down their lives to be considered fools by the entirety of the rest of the world. But fools not alone in their speech, not fools in their conduct, but fools for Christ. You could be a fool for Christ, the only permitted fool. Otherwise, nobody's fool. To God be the glory.